All right, here we are. We're doing a live stream Phantastes book club on the Grail Country channel this time. I think we'll continue to do it here. And I'm joined by Luke and Jason, and we're going through George MacDonald's book. Whoops, Phantastes. There we go. Everybody's got
All
their
right.
preferred version. And people who love George MacDonald tend to carry around his works like Bibles, with mine's new, so it's not dog-eared.
I'm a little embarrassed that mine's not more worn, honestly.
Yeah. I think Jason's is pretty worn.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a cheap copy too. I bought it used, but the pages fall out.
Oh no!
I know. Sometimes I'll open it and they'll just fall on the floor. Luckily, they're numbered.
Okay, so we did. I think somewhere Nate linked our first episode, which can be found on Jason's channel, right, Jason?
Yes. Yep.
And so we covered chapter 1, and we're trying to do it as a read through, which I hope doesn't bore people, but if it does, they can just switch the channel. Right?
Yeah. It's interesting stuff.
Yeah, so we're on chapter 2, and chapter 2 is really short. So does somebody want to read that?
I can. Let me get there. I'm not going to read the German. All right. So it starts with another quote from, do you say it novelist or novalis?
Novalis.
Novalis. Okay. It says, "Where is the stream?" cried he with tears. "Seest thou not its blue waves above us?" He looked up, and lo, the blue stream was flowing gently over their heads. All right. And now it starts. While these strange events were passing through my mind, I suddenly, as one awakes to the consciousness that the sea has been moaning by him for hours, or that the storm has been howling about his window all night, became aware of the sound of running water near me. And looking out of bed, I saw that a large green marble basin in which I was wont to wash, and which stood on a low pedestal of the same material in the corner of my room, was overflowing like a spring, and that a stream of clear water was running over the carpet all the length of the room, finding its outlet I knew not where, and, stranger still, where this carpet, which I had found myself designed to imitate a field of grass and daisies, bordered the course of the little stream. The grass blades and daisies seemed to wave in a tiny breeze that followed the water's flow. Under the rivulet they bent and swayed with every motion of the changeful current, and as if they were about to dissolve with it, and, forsaking their fixed form, became fluent as the waters. My dressing table was an old-fashioned piece of furniture of black oak, with drawers all down the front. These were elaborately carved in foliage, of which ivy formed the chief part. The nearer end of this table remained just as it had been, but on the further end a singular change had commenced. I happened to fix my eye on a little cluster of ivy leaves. The first of these was evidently the work of the carver, and next looked curious. The third was unmistakably ivy, and just beyond it a tendril of clematis twined itself about the gilt handle of one of the drawers. Hearing next a slight motion, I looked up and saw that the branches and leaves designed upon the curtains of my bed were slightly in motion. Not knowing what change might follow next, I thought it high time to get up, and springing out of the bed, my bare feet alighted upon a cool green sward. And although I dressed in all haste, I found myself completing my toilet under the boughs of a great tree, whose top waved in the golden stream of the sunrise with many interchanging lights, and with shadows of leaf and branch gliding over leaf and branch, as the cool morning wind swung to and fro like a sinking sea wave. After washing as well as I could in the clear stream, I rose and looked around me. The tree under which I seemed to have lain all night was one of the advanced guard of a dense forest, towards which a rivulet ran. Faint traces of a footpath, much overgrown with grass and moss, and with here and there a pimpernel even, were discernible along the right bank. This, thought I, must surely be the path to fairyland, which the lady of last night promised I should soon find. I crossed the rivulet and accompanied it, keeping the footpath on its right bank, until it led me, as I expected, into the wood. Here I left it, without any good reason. and with a vague feeling that I ought to have followed its course, I took a more southerly direction.
I always wondered about that last line. I took a more southerly direction. You know, I always wondered if George is like, I don't know if you remember did we lose Luke?
Oh, did he freeze again?
Is he frozen up for you too?
Yeah.
Hello?
Oh, there you go.
I can hear you. You're
I
still
can hear
frozen
you, but
now.
you're frozen. Your
Oh,
pictures.
weird.
You look very studious, though.
It's still there.
That will help. I don't know.
No, you're still
Yeah.
still in that
Give you
studious
context.
position.
You're holding the book like
Oh, there
this
you
and
go.
reading.
There you go.
Now you're moving again.
I like pay for the lowest internet I can ever get.
So, you know, that last line, he says, "Here I left it without any good reason, and with a vague feeling that I ought to have followed its course, I took a more southerly direction." So he actually didn't follow his gut, right? Am I reading that right? Here
Yeah.
I left it. I crossed the rivulet and accompanied it, keeping the footpath on its right bank until it led me, as I expected, into the wood. Here I left it without any good reason, and with the vague feeling that I ought to have followed its course, I took a more southerly direction. Why? You're like,
Oh,
no, don't
Yeah.
open the door, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I
So,
wonder, like following your true north. I don't know if that, like, for whatever reason, that's what I thought of with that last line.
I know,
Instead
yeah.
of following your true north, which is the direction your intuition would usually lead you or something. And why not go south?
Yeah, how do you know, when you describe things going badly, you call them going south, right?
Yeah.
That's
Everything
true.
went south.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's
So
true.
when I saw that, I'm like, uh-oh, he's going in a more southerly direction.
Yeah.
Heavens. What did you guys think of the Novalis quote at the beginning? "Where's the stream?" cried he with tears. "Seest thou it's not in blue waves above us?" He looked up, and lo, the blue stream was flowing gently over their heads. Any
I love
thoughts
that
on
quote.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's it seems simple to me now. I think now that but like probably, I don't know, maybe even 2 years ago, I wouldn't have thought like that at all. Like to think of waters above me. Like it clearly says that in the Bible, but just going about my day, I never really associate the blue sky with the blue waters below and the clouds with rivers. Because there's lots of scriptures that talk about it. Like I think there's a psalm, one of the psalms where it talks about the clouds above are being guided by God, like they're being turned by God's guidance, the rivers above and things like that. But in my day to day, I just don't think like that. Even though it rains, I'm just like, I wouldn't put it together that the rivers are actually above me, flowing in
Right.
it's like a heavenly river. Yeah,
Yeah.
the living waters or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have a lot of weather from the Pacific coast, like Vancouver, right? Comes our way. And they get like that's what happened in January, why it was so warm, because we get these what they call atmospheric rivers. So I'm used to the terminology actually because of our weather patterns here. And yeah, I just thought, but Novalis put it in a very poetic way, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I immediately thought of I thought of Michael Martin's Submerged Reality, which I started not that long ago. But just the title, and like he's already submerged at this point in the story, even though he hasn't even taken a foot out of bed yet.
Yeah.
But
what came to my mind when I read that that second chapter was I have it saved here. In Lilith, Mr. Vane is talking. Oh, of course, now it disappears on me. Mr. Vane and Mr. Raven are talking to each other, And there's this great dialogue. I mean, I don't want to get caught up in it, but I have to read it to you. So, Mr. Raven is asking him, let me see here, where his house is, something like that. 10 minutes ago, you did not see it, and now you don't know where it stands. I do. Where do you think it stands? Why, there, where you know it is. Where is there? You bother me with your silly questions, I cried. This is Mr. Vane. I'm growing tired of you. And then Mr. Raven says to him, that tree stands on the hearth of your kitchen and grows nearly straight up its chimney, he said. And then Mr. Vane says, now I know you're making game of me. I answered with a laugh of scorn. And Mr. Raven says, was I making game of you when you discovered me looking out of your star sapphire yesterday? And then he says, that was this morning, not an hour ago. I have been widening your horizon longer than that, Mr. Vane, but never mind. You mean you've been making a fool of me, I said, turning from him. Excuse me, no one can do that but yourself, and I decline to do it. You mistake. How? In declining to acknowledge yourself one already, you make yourself such by refusing what is true, and for that you will sorely punish yourself. How again? By believing what is not true. And then Mr. Vane says, then if I walk to the other side of that tree, I shall walk through the kitchen fire? Certainly. You would first, however, walk through the lady at the piano in the breakfast room. That rose bush is close by her. You would give her a terrible start. There's no lady in the house. Indeed. Is not your housekeeper a lady? She is counted such in a certain country where all are servants and the liveries one and multitudinous. She cannot use the piano anyhow. Her niece can. She is there, a well-educated girl and a capital musician. Excuse me, I cannot help it. You seem to me to be talking sheer nonsense. If you could but hear the music, those great long heads of wild hyacinth are inside the piano, among the strings of it, and give that peculiar sweetness to her playing. Pardon me, I forgot your deafness. Two objects, I said, cannot exist in the same place at the same time. Can they not? I did not know. I remember now. They do teach that with you. It is a great mistake, one of the greatest ever wiseacre made. No man of the universe, only a man of the world, could have said so. Oh, you librarian, you talk such rubbish. Plainly, you did not read many of the books in your charge. Oh, yes, I went through all in your library at the time and came out at the other side not much the wiser. And then he says, and then Mr. Vane says, I went to the rose bush and listened hard, but could not hear the thinnest ghost of a sound. I only smelt something I had never before smelt in any rose. It was still rose odor, but with a difference, caused, I suppose, by the wedding march. Like, this is one of those masterpiece dialogues that George MacDonald does, right? And when I read this second chapter of the room transforming into this woodland scene, right, where his curtain, the vines on his curtains start to come to life, and he has to get dressed under the tree, and his basin becomes a river or a creek, and I thought immediately of that scene in Lilith, and the things that stand out to me there, and also in Phantastes, are the line when he says, where is it here? Declining to acknowledge yourself a fool, essentially, you make yourself such by refusing what is true. And then he says, I can't find it here, but when he says, how can two things, here, two objects, I said, cannot exist in the same place at the same time, right? And then Mr. Raven says, can they not? I did not know. And then he goes to the rose bush and he listens hard and he couldn't hear any sound, but he said the rose smelt different, right? something I had never before smelt in any rose. It was still rose odor, but with a difference, caused, I suppose, by the wedding march. Because the girl was playing the wedding march on the piano, right?
Mhm.
And so now the rose had a different smell. So I'm not asking anybody to understand that, but I think what George MacDonald is trying to illustrate here is that two things can exist in the same place at the same time. Two objects can exist in the same place at the same time, right? And I'm wondering, I mean, that was a kind of a long, I haven't really, I mean, I have thought about it, but I'm wondering what you think of that. If you guys have any thoughts about it. You don't have to, but I'm just wondering if you do.
My immediate thought, and I don't want to skip too far ahead, was how. Well, no, I gotta wait till we get to that chapter. But how? Yeah, I'm gonna spoil it if I say it, but I'll do it anyways.
Yeah,
Just
do it.
how a fairy and a flower
Mm-hmm.
can.
That's coming up.
Yeah, that shift is, it's in this between space, and at some point you can't tell the difference, and unless you're it's almost as if it has to be in a certain light, and we've talked about that in the past.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That subtle shift between the flower and the fairy is, I think, a perfect example of what you're suggesting there.
Right, right. So the two things existing in the same place at the same time. He does this a lot with enchantment, right?
Yeah.
Like throughout the story, where this is kind of the role of the shadow, is to disenchant things, right? And to make them plain and mundane, right? So you have you've got this bedroom, this everyday bedroom that just turns into a forest grove, right? Teeming with life. So his whole world becomes enchanted. And once upon a time I had some really interesting thoughts about this, and now for some reason it's just evading me, which is fine, because I think thoughts are like fairies anyways, and if they want to play, they'll come out and play.
Yeah, I know.
Right now they don't want to
feeling.
come out and play.
Yeah.
So anyway,
What comes to my mind, I feel like I'm kind of, you can stop me too, because I feel like I might be kind of taking away from the idea. I don't know if I'm adding to it, but even the idea of just everything the rose could contain within it. So just the fragrance of the rose could have almost like a nostalgia of the wedding day within it, or so everything is kind of encompassed in that one single flower in a way.
well,
But I feel like that's not quite what he's getting at, but maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know.
I mean, I remember what I loved about that the rose takes on, it still smells like a rose, but it has a different odor. And he thinks that odor is affected by the wedding march, because the girl's playing the piano there, right? In the room where Mr. Vane says, "This is your kitchen," and there, and there's a girl playing the piano there. And he's like, "No, that's just a tree." And he's like, "Oh, you're standing in the middle of your hearth, kind of thing."
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
we're moving between Lilith and Phantastes right now, if anybody's listening, but I think it's really related, and it's something that George MacDonald does a lot in the story, and it has something to do with the mundane becoming beautiful, enchanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting that he plays with the senses. So the ability to hear see, he doesn't hear the music in that piece that I read from Lilith, but the smell of the rose changes because of the music. Okay.
Mhm.
So the music is affecting the odor of the rose, and yet he can't hear it. but he detects it through his senses anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In a way, this is what I would try to continue to say about how the intuition can function in a very spontaneous way to reveal, like it takes these finite sensory emotional phenomena that we're experiencing, but it is through those that, then we can sort of experience through the imagination something far beyond what is physically physically representing itself to us. So
But then,
it's
okay,
moving around the finite image.
Okay, those little thought fairies are want to come out and play now.
Let's hear them.
But okay, so the rose becomes the music,
Yeah.
right? The smell of the rose becomes the wedding march. And I find that really fascinating because this has to do with his idea that two things exist in the same place at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that, and the senses are like interchangeable in a sense, like the deafness that he experiences as a result of his lack of imagination is replaced by his sense of smell, because the rose then just takes on a more robust smell, right? Because he can't hear the music. And the rose is both the piano and the rose.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
That's really fascinating.
Yeah.
It kind of he does that really, really well in Lilith, where two are the things, but they're not the same thing, and all that, and two objects exist in the same place. But while you were talking, it was making me even think of like, I feel like I'm going to be taking away from every time I start talking about it, because I feel like I don't understand it to the level George MacDonald does. But I was thinking about like how like the part that came to my mind when you were talking is like, even in Song of Solomon, as I am the rose of Sharon, like this woman is the rose. She's the same thing, and they're two separate objects, but they're the same thing. And even flower girls, it's like, are they flowers or are they girls? Because they walk down the aisle and they're shedding petals everywhere, and it's like they're in that moment they're little flowers like running down the aisle, sort of. So it's kind of, but I feel like I still feel like he understands it or gets it on the level.
Well,
like
I think what he's doing,
getting a taste.
Yeah, I mean, what he's doing is he's appealing to our childlike imagination, right? In Phantastes, when the room becomes the woods, we can imagine that, right? I mean, we've all probably had the experience as children making forts in the woods, right? And so you go into the woods and you build this fort. I wrote a little thing about it.
Wait, this guy has. I can't give him. Luke, I know you have. You've told me about your forts.
Oh yeah, I was building forts
until
I was an adult. Still do.
Yeah, so I actually wrote a thing about that. I'll see if I'll have a look and see if it's worth sharing. But yeah, so he appeals to that, but he's trying to help us. I think this is what he's helping us to move into fairyland, right? Like, we're making that transition from the mundane, the everyday, the way that we perceive the world, or you could call it your frame even, into this more enchanted world. And so and those two worlds exist at the same time, right? They have to, otherwise they wouldn't be cross-pollinating each other. Like, you wouldn't hear the wedding march in the smell of a rose, right? Like that piece that I read out of Lilith.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I like that phrase you used, they cross-pollinating one another. That was good.
Yeah.
That helps me.
Yeah. I'm just going to look here quickly. And any other thoughts?
You got any, Luke?
I do, but I don't know if it'll, like you, Jason. I feel like I'm just detracting, but I just feel like what I sense is that what is in the process of becoming, and so like there's this idea that perhaps we can see what maybe is becoming, and honestly that's kind of like a perpetual revelation that's always occurring within whatever finite object, but I don't know. Yeah, this is where I feel like I'm going to sound too weird, but it's I wonder if there's something to be said about time and how time functions in this moment, where these two objects are incommensurable, but they become commensurable in that measurement of time. For whatever reason, it's either like they, I don't know, some weird inception thing or what.
I'm sure we're going to run into some of his he plays with time a lot too, right?
Yeah.
Time and space, right? Mm-hmm. And I know, like, I can think about Lilith in that regard. I can think about examples in Lilith, but I can't think of any in Phantastes at the moment, but where he plays with time and space, because in Lilith it's, the days, happen in like a couple of hours, and sometimes they take 4 days, sometimes they take 2 hours, and he's always being told that time is different where he is now, things like that. I can't think of an example in Phantastes at the moment, but yeah. Okay, so he's heading in a southerly direction. That's a little hint, I think.
Also, am I right? The first thing he does when he gets to Fairyland is he poops behind a tree.
He does?
Well, he's finishing his toilet.
Oh no, it's finishing his toilet. No, I don't think his toilet in that regard is just washing and dressing.
Oh,
okay. I picture him pooping behind a tree too. I'm right with you.
Yeah, dude. I was like, that's the first place my head went.
Like he's in Fairyland now. He's fully in.
He found a cool green sward.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so chapter 3. I'll read a little bit, and then maybe Luke, do you want to read more after I read a little bit? Because it's a little bit longer.
It is a little longer.
Man doth usurp all space, stares thee in rock, bush, river in the face. Never thine eyes behold a tree. 'Tis no sea thou seest in the sea, 'tis but a disguised humanity. To avoid thy fellow, vain thy plan. All that interests a man is man. Henry Sutton. And I just want to say that this goes back to what's coming here, where the fairies are the flowers and the flowers are the fairies, right? So man doth usurp all space, stares thee in rock, bush, river in the face. Never thine eyes behold a tree. 'Tis no sea thou seest in the sea, 'tis but a disguised humanity, right? So this is what the fairies are. They're the shape of the human being in creation. The trees which were far apart where I entered, giving free passage to the level rays of the sun, closed rapidly as I advanced, so that ere long their crowded stems barred the sunlight out, forming as it were a thick grating between me and the east, which I think is an interesting sentence. I seemed to be advancing toward a second midnight. In the midst of the intervening twilight, however, before I entered what appeared to be the darkest portion of the forest, I saw a country maiden coming towards me from its very depths. She did not seem to observe me, for she was apparently intent upon a bunch of wild flowers, which she carried in her hand. I could hardly see her face, for though she came direct towards me, she never looked up. But when we met, instead of passing, she turned and walked alongside of me for a few yards, still keeping her face downwards and busied with her flowers. She spoke rapidly, however, all the time in a low tone, as if talking to herself, but evidently addressing the purport of her words to me. She seemed afraid of being observed by some lurking foe. "Trust the oak," said she. "Trust the oak and the elm and the great beech. Take care of the birch, for though she is honest, she is too young not to be changeable. But shun the ash and the alder, for the ash is an ogre. You will know him by his thick fingers, and the alder will smother you with her web of hair if you let her near you at night." All this was uttered without pause or alteration of tone. Then she turned suddenly and left me walking still with the same unchanging gait. I could not conjecture what she meant, but satisfied myself with thinking that it would be time enough to find out her meaning when there was need to make use of her warning, and that the occasion would reveal the admonition. I concluded from the flowers that she carried that the forest could not be everywhere, so dense as it appeared from where I was now walking, and I was right in this conclusion, for soon I came to a more open part, and by crossed a wide grassy glade on which there were several circles of brighter green. But even here I was struck with the utter stillness. No bird sang, no insect hummed, not a living creature crossed my way, yet somehow the whole environment seemed only asleep, and to wear even in sleep an air of expectation. The trees seemed all to have an expression of conscious mystery, as if they said to themselves, "We would, and if we would. We could, and if we would." They had all a meaning look about them. Then I remembered that night is the fairies' day, and the moon their sun, and I thought, everything sleeps and dreams now. When the night comes, it will all be different. At the same time, I, being a man and a child of the day, felt some anxiety as to how I should fare among the elves and the other children of the night, who wake when mortals dream, and find their common life in those wondrous hours that flow noiselessly over the moveless, death-like forms of men and women and children, lying strewn and parted beneath the weight of the heavy waves of night, which flow on and beat them down and hold them drowned and senseless until the ebb tide comes and the waves sink away back into the ocean of dark. But I took courage and went on. Soon, however, I became again anxious, though from another cause. I had eaten nothing that day, and for an hour past had been feeling the want of food, so I grew afraid lest I should find nothing to meet my human necessities in this strange place. But once more I comforted myself with hope and went on. I want to stop here for a minute because that bit where he talks about people sleeping at night,
Hmm.
I remember because I read it and listened to it several times on Audible, and I kept thinking to myself, "Man, he's really going on and on about this." You
Yeah.
know, like if you think about it, he says, he had some anxiety as to how I should fare among the elves and other children of the night who wake when mortals dream, and find their common life in those wondrous hours that flow noiselessly over moveless, death-like forms of men, women, and children, lying strewn and parted beneath the weight of the heavy waves of night, which flow on and beat them down and hold them drowned and senseless until the ebb tide comes and the waves sink away back into the ocean of the dark. Like that's a major little description of people sleeping at night.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagined because he had lots of kids, as far as I remember. I think he had like 8, maybe more. I can't remember exactly. And I imagine him being up late at night writing and then looking, at everybody in the house just strewn about, right?
Hmm.
Being, moving in their sleep, talking in their sleep, he, and having that image in his head, of them being pressed down. And I like how he starts out the whole thing with everything, um, children of the night who wake when mortals dream and find their common life in those wondrous hours. The common life. The idea of a common life together.
Hmm.
All right. Before noon, I fancied I saw a thin blue smoke rising amongst the stems of larger trees in front of me, and soon I came to an open spot of ground in which stood a little cottage, so built that the stems of four great trees formed its corners, while their branches met and intertwined over its roof, heaping a great cloud of leaves over it up toward the heavens. I wish we had a picture of it. I wondered at finding a human dwelling in this neighborhood, and yet it did not look altogether human, though sufficiently so to encourage me to expect to find some sort of food. Seeing no door, I went round to the other side, and there I found one wide open. A woman sat beside it, preparing some vegetables for dinner. This was homely and comforting. As I came near, she looked up, and seeing me, showed no surprise, but bent her head again over her work and said in a low tone, "Did you see my daughter?" "I believe I did," I said. "Can you give me something to eat, for I am very hungry?" "With pleasure," she replied in the same tone. "But do not say anything more till you come into the house, for the ash is watching us." Having said this, she rose and led the way into the cottage, which I now saw was built of the stems of small trees set closely together, and was furnished with rough chairs and tables, from which even the bark had not been removed. As soon as she had shut the door and set a chair, "Have you fairy blood in you?" said she, looking hard at me. "How do you know that?" "No, you have fairy blood in you," said she, looking hard at me. "How do you know that? You could not have got so far into this wood if it were not so, and I am trying to find some trace of it in your countenance. I think I see it." "What do you see?" "Oh, never mind. I may be mistaken in that." "But how then do you come to live here?" "Because I too have fairy blood in me." Here I, in my turn, looked hard at her, and thought I could perceive, notwithstanding the coarseness of her features, and especially the heaviness of her eyebrows, a something unusual. I could hardly call it grace, and yet it was an expression that strangely contrasted with the form of her features. I noticed too that her hands were delicately formed, though brown with work and exposure. "I should be ill," she continued, "if I did not live on the borders of the fairies' country, and now and then eat of their food. And I see by your eyes that you are not quite free of the same need, though from your education and the activity of your mind you have felt it less than I. You may be further removed, too, from the fairy race." I remembered what the lady had said about my grandmothers. Here she placed some bread and some milk before me, with a kindly apology for the homeliness of the fare, with which, however, I was in no humor to quarrel. I now thought it time to try to get some explanation of the strange words both of her daughter and herself. "What did you mean by speaking so about the ash?" She rose and looked out of the little window. My eyes followed her, but as the window was too small to allow anything to be seen from where I was sitting, I rose and looked over her shoulder. I had just time to see across the open space, on the edge of the denser forest, a single large ash tree whose foliage showed bluish amidst the truer green of the other trees around it. When she pushed me back with an expression of impatience and terror, and then almost shut out the light from the window by setting up a large old book in it. "In general," said she, recovering her composure, "there is no danger in the daytime, for then he is sound asleep. But there is something unusual going on in the woods. There must be some solemnity among the fairies tonight, for all the trees are restless, and although they cannot come awake, they see and hear in their sleep. But what danger is to be dreaded from him?" Instead of answering the question, she went again to the window and looked out, saying she feared the fairies would be interrupted by foul weather, for a storm was brewing in the west. "And the sooner it grows dark, the sooner the ash will be awake," added she. I asked her how she knew that there was any unusual excitement in the woods. She replied, "Besides the look of the trees, the dog there is unhappy, and the eyes and ears of the white rabbit are redder than usual, and he frisks about as if he expected some fun. If the cat were at home, she would have her back up, for the young fairies pull the sparks out of her tail with bramble thorns, and she knows when they are coming. So do I, in another way." At this instant, a gray cat rushed in like a demon and disappeared in a hole in the wall. "There, I told you," said the woman. "But what of the ash tree?" said I, returning once more to the subject. Here, however, the young woman who I had met in the morning entered. A smile passed between the mother and daughter, and then the latter began to help her mother in the little household duties. I should like to stay here till the evening, I said, and then go on my journey if you will allow me. You are welcome to do as you please. Only it might be better to stay all night than risk the dangers of the wood then. Where are you going? Nay, that I do not know, I replied, but I wish to see all that is to be seen, and therefore I should like to start just at sundown. You are a bold youth, if you have any idea of what you are daring, but a rash one, if you know nothing about it. And excuse me, you do not seem very well informed about the country and its manners. However, no one comes here, but for some reason, either known to himself or to those who have charge of him. So you shall do just as you wish. Do we want to discuss what we've read, or do we want to just keep going? Because it's a long chapter, actually.
I'm
Yeah, it
happy
is a
to.
long chapter. Especially that last line that you just read. I'd like to hear what you guys think about that, because it's very peculiar. However, no one comes here but for some reason either known to himself or to those who have charge of him. So you shall do just as you wish.
Wow.
What do you guys think? Any thoughts?
I do. I have some thoughts.
Yeah, it's true. Because
Well, it's funny because there's been a lot of chatter about. I'm going to bring something contemporary into the conversation, but there's been a lot of chatter about Jordan Peterson and what's he doing, and people are unhappy with a lot of the ways that he's doing things, or the things that he's saying, or how he says them, and all those things, right? And my response has been, he's going to do what he's going to do, because he is who he is, right? And this is exactly what this is saying to me. So, no one comes here but for some reason. Either I love the way George MacDonald phrases things. No one comes here but for some reason, either known to himself or to those who have charge of him. So you shall do just as you wish. So, this is taught all. I find George MacDonald is always talking about what is, not what could be or what should be, right? So should he travel at night? He's going to do what he's going to do, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is exactly what being a child of God and becoming is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess my thought on it too is that he didn't exactly have any choice in falling into fairyland. It's something that sort of just took hold of him. I mean, I'm sure there's a certain level of seduction involved with it.
Well, but he does go south.
Yeah, I guess that is true.
He knowingly goes off the path that he intuits he should be following, but he decides not to, and he goes off of it and heads in a southerly direction.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess I'm wondering if there is a charge, if there is some sort of authority that's directing him, or whether that be destiny or fate or some other word that we could use, God, and that's what's moving him through this experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know.
Well, I've always appreciated the characters in his stories they're always allowed to be who they are. Like in The Wise Woman, there's this young girl who's, throwing temper tantrums all the time. And, when the wise woman carries her in her cloak, every now and then she sets her down and the girl just does something crazy, right? Because she's scared and she doesn't know where she is and she doesn't know what's going to happen next. And she wants her own way because she's always had her own way. And the wise woman just waits on her, doesn't give her any real instruction, right? And there's a beautiful scene in The Wise Woman where the girl runs away from her. I'm trying to remember exactly how it goes, but anyway, and she finds herself completely alone in the dark in the forest, and she gets really scared, and she wants to be with her, right? The wise woman, who has basically just kidnapped her from her parents. Like, so she's not a comforting character, actually, at that point in the story. And the wise woman continues, like, as the girl runs off in one direction, the wise woman just continues down the path that she was on, that in the direction that they were headed, right? And then the little girl's over here. So this, here's the here's the wise woman, here's the little girl, and she gets scared and she turns. And as she turns and runs, the wise woman is there to meet her immediately. Right? And she says, there's a line in there somewhere where as soon as she heard her feet, she turned, and then the cloak was open and the girl ran into the cloak and she was safe, right? And I always found that very moving because God is not coercive. He's not, he's not going to tell you what you should do. He's going to let you do as you wish, right? And then as soon as you're ready, he's right there. And I think that's what this is talking about.
Yeah.
I also love the part, I mean, it's kind of going back a little bit, but the part you paused on the first time when you're talking about sleep, and it said, the trees all seem to have an expression of conscious mystery, as if they said to themselves, we could, and if we would. And they all had a meaning look about them. Then I remembered that night is the fairies' day, and the moon is their sun. And I thought, everything sleeps and dreams now. When the night comes, it will be different. And I just love that I think it was one of our first conversations, three of us together, when we were talking about the moon and how that is like the it's just seeing by a different light, where the things aren't as clearly defined and they're kind of mysterious, and it's kind of like a subconscious thought in a way, and following something like that, because the moon is associated with waters as well. With the tides and everything. And so I don't know, I just always love that. And then the part where so I could tell maybe a personal story, and I don't know if it'll be that relevant, but like he says at the end of the second chapter, when he said he took a more southerly direction and had a strange feeling he ought to stay on the path. So it wasn't this past New Year's I went out into the woods anyway, but the New Year's before that I was like, I'm gonna just go walk out. It was down a trail. Like, I didn't just go wander like out of nowhere, but it was a trail that I used to walk all the time with my dogs, and it was just out in the woods here in East Tennessee for those people watching. And I was like, so this trail, I knew the spot I wanted to get to, because I would always go there by the river and let my dogs swim, but it was probably close to 3 miles back in the woods, and it was like New Year's night, and I just wanted to spend it in the woods. But it was the creepiest freaking night the whole time. And the whole time I had this vibe, just like, I should not be here right now. I don't know why. The air was like just weirdly warm, and there was like a breeze blowing the whole time, and it was way too warm than like it should have been. The whole night felt creepy. But it was one of those things like where if I would have just turned around and gone back home, I would have got nothing from the experience,
Right.
So it's kind of like I'm thinking now, like, even if I just right now it's dark out, if I just went and walked in the woods, who knows what I would find. And then if I was on a trail, to like he does, turn off the trail, even like kind of ignore what's telling me, oh, you should probably stay on the trail because you'll get lost. It's kind of like, well, isn't that the point in a way? Like, and then just wander off in the dark even further, and then who knows what magical things you could find or horrors you could find or whatever. And I don't know. So
well,
that kind of
there's 3 directions mentioned in it so far in what we've read, right? So he's heading in a southerly direction. There's some kind of a veil that's blocking the east, right? And there's a storm brewing in the West.
I didn't know that.
I didn't even
Yeah.
realize one part. That's wild. Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm. So we'll just leave.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it.
Yeah. I don't know.
You know,
In
Jordan.
the
Go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go. I'm gonna find
Oh,
something.
I was
here.
just gonna say the part where she was talking about like how she can just notice there's a difference in this night than in the other nights, in the way he describes. Besides the look of the trees, the dog there is unhappy, and the eyes and the ears of the white rabbit are redder than usual, and he frisks about as if he expected some fun. If the cat were at home, she would have her back up, for the young fairies pull the sparks out of her tail with bramble thorns, and she knows when they are coming. So do I, in another way. Just like at this instant, a gray cat rushed in like a demon and disappeared in a hole in the wall. It's just his descriptions of things. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so good.
And there's a further description of the fairies. It's coming up in this chapter, I think, of the fairies actually getting the sparks out of the cat's tail. And then at first I didn't know what he was talking about when he talked about these sparks in the cat's tail. I wanted to read this. This is from another essay that George MacDonald wrote called "The Fantastic Imagination," and so the person, he writes it as, you know, someone asks him a question and he answers them, right? So the question is, you write as if a fairy tale were a thing of importance. Must it have meaning? And then he answers, it cannot help having some meaning if it have proportion and harmony. If it have proportion and harmony, it has vitality, and vitality is truth. The beauty may be plainer in it than the truth, but without the truth, the beauty could not be, and the fairy tale would give no delight. Everyone, however, who feels the story will read its meaning after his own nature and development. One man will read one meaning in it, and another will read another. If so, how am I to assure myself that I'm not reading my own meaning into it, but yours out of it? Why should you be so assured? It may be better that you should read your meaning into it. That may be a higher operation of your intellect than the mere reading of mine out of it. Your meaning may be superior to mine. So I just wanted to add that as a little caveat, because there is no, like, what you know, whatever you're getting out of this story it's meaningful, right?
Yeah.
And even the author of the story says that that's how it should be, right? So there is no perfect interpretation of this story. That's the beauty of it. And
Yeah.
and it will, you know, like he says, how does he put that here? It cannot help having some meaning. If it have proportion and harmony, it has vitality. And vitality is truth. Vitality is life, right? So if it has proportion and harmony, it has life, and life is truth. The beauty may be plainer in it than the truth, but without the truth, the beauty could not be. So everything is contingent on everything, and it's going to speak to you in a way that relates to your own life, like it did to Jason when he compared himself walking out on New Year's Eve in the dark, right? And taking a southern path.
Yeah, the strangest thing about this book is, like, the more I read it, the more I'm like, in one way or another, at some point in my life, I seem to have lived it, or I end up living it.
Yeah.
And it's
absolutely.
like, yeah, it's
That's
so
really,
strange.
really good. That's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, like, I'll read this next chapter and I'm like, wait, this happened to me. It just was it's just the weirdest thing. But yeah.
That's great. Love it.
Love that. Yeah.
It's really good.
Should I pick up?
Yeah.
All right. I think we're.
Oh, just as you wish was the last line.
What? Yeah. I'm
says,
trying to
"You are
find it.
bold.
Oh,
You are
okay.
bold.
You shall do just as
Yeah.
you wish. Accordingly, I sat down, and feeling rather tired and declined for further talk, I asked to leave to look for the old book, which still screened the window. The woman brought it to me directly, but not before taking another look towards the forest, and then drawing a white blind over the window. I sat down opposed to it by the table, on which I laid the great old volume and read. It contained many wondrous tales of fairyland and olden times, and the knights of King Arthur's table. I read on till the shades of the afternoon began to deepen, for in the midst of the forest it gloomed. It gloomed earlier in the open country. At length I came to this passage. Here it chanced, is that right? Here it chanced upon their quest, Sir Galahad and Sir Percival recounted in the depths of the great forest now. Sir Galahad was a delight, was dight. I'm going to struggle with this, guys. Sir Galahad was dight in
All
harness
in,
of silver,
yeah. Dight. I
clear and
don't know what
shining.
that means. I'm gonna have to look that up. Maybe that means dressed, all in silver.
Yeah, dight. In which, yeah, if there's Old English in here, it's, yeah. Um, in which the delight it took upon, but full hasty to tarnish, and withouten the labour of a ready squire, uneath to be kept fair and clean, and yet withouten squire or page, Sir Galahad's armour shone like the moon, and he rode a great white mare, whose bases and other housings were black, but all but present with fair lilies and silver sheen, whereas Sir Percival bestrode a red horse with a tawny mane and a tail whose trappings were all tosmirched with mud and mire. His armor was wondrously rosty and behold.
Yeah,
Nay,
this is this is a really difficult little passage to read.
sorry, I'm struggling as much as I am. I'm doing what I can here. Nay, could he by any art furbish it again, so that the sun in his going down shone twixt the bare trunks of the tree, full upon the knights twain, the one who did seem all shining with light, and the other all to glow with ruddy fire. Now it came about in this wise, and now it came about in this wise. So for Sir Percival, after his escape from the demon lady, whereas the cross on the handle of the sword smote him to the heart, and he rove himself through the thigh, and escaped the way, and he came to a great wood, and in no wise cured of his fault, yet bemoaning the same, the damsel of the alder tree encountered him, right fair to see, and with her fair words and false countenance she comforted him and beguiled him until he followed her where she led him to a. Here a low, hurried cry from the hostess caused me to look up from the book, and I read no more. Look there, she said. Look at his fingers. Just as I had been reading in the book, the setting sun was shining through the cleft in the cloud piled up in the west, and a shadow of a large distorted hand with thick knobs and humps on the fingers, so that I was much wider so that it was much wider across the fingers than across the undivided part of the hand, passed slowly over the little blind, and then as slowly returned in the opposite direction. He is almost awake, mother, and greedier than usual tonight. Hush, child, you need to make him more angry with us than he is. You need not make him more angry than us with us than he is, for you do not know how soon something may happen to oblige us to be in the forest after nightfall. But you are in the forest, said I. How is it that you are safe here? He dares not come nearer than he is now, she replied, for any of those 4 oaks at the corners of the cottage would tear him to pieces. They are our friends. But he stands out there and makes awful faces at us sometimes and stretches out his long arms and fingers and tries to kill us with fright, for indeed that is his favorite way of doing. Pray, keep out of his way tonight.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay, when I was reading this and then listening to it, I was like, what is it about the ash and the alder? Like,
Mhm.
and then I remembered when we got married and moved into our home in Switzerland, we lived in this neighborhood that had been established in 1945, right after the war. And it was subsidized housing, and the people had to help build it. So the government paid
Mhm.
for the building of the houses. But if you were, if I guess there was some kind of, I don't know if it was a lottery or you had to pass it, you had to have the money or whatever to get this house. Then you actually had to help in the building of it. And a lot of the building materials were recycled and poor building materials because it was right after the war and everything, was hard to come by. And then they formed this like a neighborhood council. They had a president and a vice president and a treasurer and a secretary, right? And everybody had the same amount of land, and you were allowed to plant certain plants on your property, in your yard, right? Most people were growing for subsistence, so most of the lot was taken up by fruit trees, berry bushes, garden space, right? Because it was right after the war and people were hungry and living on rations, So this is all in Switzerland, okay, by the way. So they had this, and we were the very first family to move into this neighborhood since 1945. So everybody was still in neighborhood council mode, okay?
Wow.
And well, one of the neighbors was the president, and and they sent us a little, booklet of all their rules, and and we were kind of whatever, whatever. And this ash tree started growing up in our yard. And I said to my husband, are we allowed to have that in our yard? Because there was a list, right? And he's like, I don't care. I'm letting it grow. And ash is considered a weed in Switzerland. I don't know. We don't have them where I live here. So we don't have ash. We don't have beech. We have alder. And I think ash is a softwood, right?
I think,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
And
it burns?
Sure, sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah. Softwoods do burn okay. Like pine is a softwood too, and poplar is a soft. We burn those, but it's not like oak and beech, right? Those are hardwoods. Birch. And so anyway, I was just thinking more about his descriptions of these trees and what makes them, like the oak is the mighty oak, right? Like it's a massive tree. It grows over time. It's hardwood. It's almost indestructible. It forms the four corners of the house, right? And it keeps the ash at bay. So I actually wondered if ash doesn't grow in oak forests for some reason, because some plants repel other plants, right?
Yeah.
And then and the alder is much like the ash in that it pops up all over the place. It makes for great browse for like moose and deer, and they love those trees. They love those kinds of trees, right? But that's also the reason for them being so prolific, probably because they're fulfilling the task of feeding these animals. And then the birch. What does it say about the birch? She's
she's
young.
Although she is honest, she is too young not to be changeable.
She's too young not to be changeable, and she's honest. Okay, so she's also a hardwood. Birch is a hardwood, but it has a skin that's constantly peeling off, right?
Paper birch.
So it's always changing.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful description.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting to kind of think about the different species that he's talking about and why he's chosen them to be, you know, the characters that they are in the story, right? And I think that I think there's merit to the ash and the alder being little ogres, right? Because they would be a pain in the butt. We have a similar tree here, poplar trees. And they just, if you cut down a poplar, so when you kill poplar, you have to ring it and let it die on its own. If you cut it, 7,000 poplar trees will pop up out of the ground. Like seriously, because it's a living organism under the earth, right? Like it's like a net. And I don't know if that's how ash and alder grow, but I have a feeling they probably do. And so that would make them quite the ornery little plant, right? In your garden. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to I gave that a little bit of thought. I had to share it.
No, that's really good.
Anyway, about the ash tree in our garden in Switzerland, it was growing and it got to be about 4 feet tall and it grew really fast. And one day we woke up in the morning and went out in the garden and someone had broken the ash tree right in half. One of our neighbors, because they could reach it probably from the
oh,
and
sure. I bet it was a ghost. My goodness, that's terrifying.
Anyway. I was watching some video about like Irish folklore of trees or something like that, and I know that like you could get in trouble if you were to chop down certain trees. Like if you were to just take one down, you'd have to pay 2 cows or something like that, or what have you.
A fairy tree? They have fairy trees, man. You don't mess with fairy trees.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure maybe that's fundamentally why, but there was value, like certain purposes for certain trees too. It's like, I know that the alder's used for traditionally smoking meats, fish, and stuff like that. And we don't have it here. So if I want that wood, I have to like buy it and get it shipped. But I don't know what point I was trying to make, but like there's certain trees that have value and then other ones that are cursed and probably get paid to take those down.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and what you're talking about, Sherry, reminds me of the part we're almost to it. We're not quite there yet, but I feel like it's kind of similar when he's talking about the fairies, and you're almost kind of talking about the fairy of the tree. I'll just read the little part here because it says, "For just what the flower says to you," so you could say, "For just what the tree says to you, would the face and form of the fairy say, only so much more plainly as a face and human figure can express more than a tree." So it's kind of like you're looking at the tree and you're looking at all of its qualities, everything it does, how it acts, how it interacts with the land, with the things around it, and from that your personality almost, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like the oaks being, it makes total sense why there'd be like, I can just imagine these 4 oaks guarding this house.
Yeah.
And being just like the hardest, heaviest wood. They're immovable, they're unstoppable. And depending on how old they are, they could be like older than probably likely the monster of the and now I can't even think of what it is. Not the alder, but the
ash. Ash. It says here that the ash stands there and makes awful faces at us sometimes and stretches out his long arms and fingers and tries to kill us with fright.
Yeah, I love that.
and these trees that grow in these mats, like the poplar and the cottonwood. I've got 2 cottonwood right out in front here, and they're right at the edge of a like a graveled patio area. And then I've got these flower gardens in there, and every year every year they send up shoots from their roots, right?
Oh wow.
That's how they make new trees.
Mhm.
And so I'm, you know, my lily's growing, and then I've got some, you know, bee balm next to it, and then in the middle there's this, you know, this cottonwood is setting up a shoot, and I'm constantly fighting with it, and those long arms and fingers are moving further and further into my garden, right? Trying to find a place where I won't notice, so that it can start to set root and take over, right? And
Yeah.
that's exactly probably how the ash acts. And so that is how his description is, and I just thought it was great because I do feel like my tree out there sometimes staring at me and making awful faces while he stretches out his long arms and fingers, right? And
Oh,
gives me such a fright. It's perfect. It's a perfect description.
it really is.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question for you, Sherry. You said you have alder tree, right?
Alder, yeah.
Is it because it's interesting to me that in this story of Sir Percival, how the damsel of the alder tree encountered him, right to see, and with her fair words and false countenance, she comforted him and beguiled him until he
Yeah.
followed her where she led him. Is the alder tree? Is it kind of uh, deceiving in a way, or something
It,
where
you
you could
know,
think it's
what the only thing that comes to my mind is for the longest time I thought they were young birch.
Mm.
I thought the alder were young birch because they have a similar leaf to the birch, but they're not. They're alder, and
hmm.
so they are deceiving in that sense. But my goats found them out for me because they prefer the alder to the birch, the young birch saplings, and birch saplings usually grew off of an old birch stump, whereas the alder just comes straight out of the ground. So yeah, and both, I don't know about ash, but poplar and alder, they like it where it's wet,
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
they grow like crazy, like weeds. I mean, there's a lot to say
Ah,
about Sir Galahad and Sir Percival, but I don't know if we want to get
yeah,
into that because
Sure.
it's essentially he's just reading an excerpt out of that great book, right?
Mhm.
Um,
yeah,
which
yeah. I
is
mean, the interesting part to me is like I've listened to that story, the audio version of it, and I mean, it's not an alder tree he encounters. He encounters a lady. So that's why I just think it's interesting that George MacDonald is able to see the two as the same thing in
No
this weird
kidding.
way, in this weird place of fairyland that he's. Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, he encounters like I think it's some lady on a ship, and she entices him to get on the ship with him or something. But it's not a tree, and so it's just that's what's interesting to me. Like he's reading this, but he's like reading it in his own fairy
own,
tale
yeah.
like translation or something. It's
Oh,
really
interesting.
it's quite
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. So he's inserting his fairy tale is over, is 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 inhabiting King
Yeah.
Arthur's fairy tale.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. You know, I'm part of the Grail Country team, but I don't hardly know any of the.
Arthurian literature. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't. It's
Yeah.
terrible.
Some of
I'm
it,
learning.
it
I'm learning it now. I'm still
Yeah.
learning.
yeah.
Same.
I listened to a lot of it, and it's actually a lot of fun. It feels like little fairy tales, a lot of them, but there's some of them that strike me more that stick with me more than other ones. A lot of them, some of them don't even really catch my interest very much. But I think this one that he's reading is actually the one where they're on the quest for the Grail, and that's
Yeah,
where. So yeah, so it's appropriate that we're doing that reference.
and the juxtaposition of Galahad and Percival, because Galahad, it was like this perfect virginal, you know,
Yeah,
priest kind of knight, and Percival was dirty and rusty and unkempt and right, deceived, and yeah,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, two completely different characters.
Yeah, I do like the one thing before we move on, and we move on right after this. I do like how he mentioned the armor though, and how that was another connection that is clear to me now. But like I said a few years ago, I wouldn't have made those connections. The connection with what does he say? The one is like silver armor, and so that
Mhm.
makes him shine. And so just thinking of it and actually thinking of the way the light hits it, and now it's his armor shines like silver, and the other one kind of has like this this
Right.
rusty armor, and so when the light hits it, it looks like fire. And so he just sees these two figures in the forest, and one's like glowing white light, and the other one looks like a flame beside him.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's
That's
really
great.
cool. I don't
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah, the image is pretty wild.
know. Oh,
Okay.
the other thing too. Sorry, I guess because I don't know what you guys say about this. She's hush child when they're talking about the alder tree, and I think it's right after it puts its hand back. She says, "He is almost awake, mother, and greedier than usual tonight. Hush, child, you need not make him more angry than he is in this part, for you do not know how soon something may happen to oblige us to be in the forest after nightfall." I just like, I don't know why. That's incredibly haunting to me.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's terrifying.
I was
Yeah.
wondering if she was saying it towards not necessarily her daughter, but like saying it out loud so that Anados could hear
Yeah.
it and be like, "Hey, I'm not chasing you into those woods. I'm coming to rescue you." I don't know. I'm reading too deep into it, but
Yeah.
I'll
I
keep
don't know
on.
where we stopped.
Shall I be able to see these beings? I
Yeah.
said
These things. Yeah.
these things. Yeah. That I cannot tell yet, not knowing how much of the fairy nature there is in you. But we shall soon see whether you can discern the fairies in my little garden, and that will be some guide to us. Are the trees fairies too, as well as the flowers? I asked. They are of the same race, she replied, though those you call fairies in your country are chiefly the young children of the flower fairies. They are very fond of having fun with thick people, as they call you, for, like most children, they like fun better than anything else. Why do you have flowers so near to you then? Do they not annoy you? Oh no, they are very amusing. Some uh, they are very amusing with their mimicries of grown people and mock solemnities. Sometimes they will act out a whole play through before my eyes with perfect composure and assurance, for they are not afraid of me. Only as soon as they have done, they burst into peals of tiny laughter, as if it was such a joke to have been serious over anything. These I speak of, however, are fairies of the garden. They are more staid and educated than those of the field and woods. Of course, they have near relations amongst the wildflowers, but they patronize them and treat them as country cousins who know nothing of life and very little of manners. Now and then, however, they are compelled to envy in grace and simplicity of the natural flowers. Do they live in the flowers? I said. I cannot tell, she replied. There is something in it I do not understand. Sometimes they disappear altogether, even from me, though I know they are near. They seem to die always with the flowers they resemble, and by those names they are called, but whether they return to life with the fresh flowers, or whether it be new flowers, new fairies, I cannot tell. They have as many sorts of dispositions as men and women, while their moods are yet more variable. 20 different expressions will cross their little faces in a half a minute. I, I often amuse myself with watching them, but I have never been able to make personal acquaintance with any of them. If I speak to one, he or she looks in my face as if I were not heeding, gives a little laugh, and runs away. Here the woman started, as if recollecting herself, and said in a low voice to her daughter, "Make haste, go and watch him, and see what direction he goes." I may as well mention here that the conclusion I arrived at from the observations I was afterward able to make was that the flowers die because the fairies go away, not that the fairies disappear because the flowers die. The
Mm.
flowers seem a sort of house for them, or outer bodies, which they can put on and off when they please, just as you could form some idea of the nature of man from the kind of a house he builds, if he has followed his own taste. So you could, without seeing the fairies, tell what any one of them was like by looking at the flower till you feel that you understand it. This, I feel like, is exactly what we were talking about earlier on in the conversation. But I'll continue. For just what the flower says to you, would the face and form of the fairy say, not only so much plainly as the face and the human figure can express more than a flower. For the house or the clothes, though like the inhabitant of the ware, cannot be wrought into an equal power of utterance. Yet would you see a strange resemblance, almost oneness between the flower and the fairy, which you could describe, which by which described itself to you, which you could describe. Wait, I feel like that's important, so I'm going to say it right. Yet would you see a strange resemblance, almost oneness between the flower and the fairy, which you could describe, but which described itself to you. Whether all the flowers have fairies, I cannot determine, any more than I can be sure whether all men and women have souls. The woman,
Sir,
the woman.
I kind of want to ask you guys about that. What do you guys think about that? It's so strange, especially coming from George MacDonald. Like, you read the rest of his stuff and you're like, what is strange, like peculiar,
Yeah.
almost if it's just a humble statement too. Whether all flowers have fairies, I cannot determine any more than I can be sure whether all men and women have souls.
It's kind of like, it's revealing too, because it's like if someone doesn't have a soul or something, you might even consider them like they're not sacred, or then you can, I don't know, if you dehumanize them.
Well, you have to remember that it's not George saying this; it's the
No,
woman.
yeah, you're right.
The woman in the cottage is saying this.
Oh, she is. Okay, I thought it was like a side note of his observation or something.
No, the woman in the cottage is saying it.
Well, I mean, we use that phrase too in conversation. Like, we'll say stuff like, "Have you no soul?" Like when someone's being cruel or something like that.
Yeah.
So like, where they're kind of appear to be an empty vessel in a way or something like that, maybe. And maybe that's what he's saying, like, whether all the flowers have fairies, I cannot determine. That the body's just, the flower's just an outer body for the fairy, the same way our bodies are just houses for our souls, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't know, that whole paragraph is so fast.
It's really good because, like, he says, something that I really liked in here was, just as you could form some idea of the nature of a man from the kind of house he built, if he followed his own taste, so you could, without seeing the fairies, tell what any one of them is like by looking at the flower till you feel that you understand it.
Yes.
Okay, and I had this. I wrote this poem recently. It was last summer about these flowers that were talking to me.
Oh, nice. Let's hear it. This is a good space for that.
Yes.
It says, it's called Yellow Flowers. They block my path on the way to the outhouse. Each head bobs precariously on bowed backs, smiling, bright, and eternally optimistic. I don't know their names, but they are everywhere. These stretch ever more tenuously across my path, asking to be seen. But what is my eye to them? Must it fall like the sun across their faces, a less glorious but still luminous orb? It seems so. So they were stretching these yellow flowers. Every time I went to the outhouse, they were literally growing like this, right, to get around a corner, and then their little yellow flower heads were popping up where the sun would hit them.
Yep.
Right. So they had these bowed backs, right? They were all bent over, and they were coming up, and they were stretching right across where I had to turn to get into the outhouse. And I thought about cutting them off, but then I thought, oh man, they're working so hard at that, Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, what are they saying to me?
Yeah.
These stretch ever more tenuously across my path, asking to be seen. But what is my eye to them? It's like, and then I have under here the participative anthropic principle. The observers are necessary for the universe to be born.
Wow. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Little.
Must it fall like the sun across their faces? Like, isn't it enough for them to just have the sunshine? No, but they have to be in the middle of my path so that I see them too, you know? Anyway,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
That's really
and then the
good.
other thing here, um,
Oh, I love that. I love that poem.
for
Yeah.
just
That's
what
really
the flower says to you, would the face and form of the fairy say,
Mhm.
only so much more plainly as a face and human figure can express more than a flower. For the house or the clothes, though like the inhabitant or the wearer, cannot be wrought into an equal power of utterance. Yet
Mm.
you would see a strange resemblance, almost oneness between the flower and the fairy, which you could not describe, but which described itself to you.
Mm.
Yeah. There's
And
my dad's currently building a cabin right now. We have like some family property. My grandfather, before he passed away, he bought like a lot of acreage out in the mountains, way out in the
mm,
mountains in Tennessee. And so my dad's built his cabin the past few years. So all my uncles are kind of, not all of them, but a few of them are building there. My uncle Matt just started his, but my uncle Mark, before he passed away, he built his cabin. And if you went and looked at his cabin, it would be, and then you saw him walk out of it, you'd just be like, that's perfect. Like that's exactly who should be living there. Like it's kind
right.
of that's what I always think about when I read this passage. Like
Yeah,
his
that's
cabin is just
true.
has
Mhm.
the weirdest stuff hanging on the walls, like just strange things. It has like
I
a
love.
weird metal armadillo just like sitting there, like just random stuff, but it's all like very rustic. And he was like a writer, big beard, and it's just exactly who would picture living there. And so it's
Perfect.
like, yeah, that's what I always think about when I read this. I'm just like, man,
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing. But I like that you wrote that even in your thing that you just read us. You even wrote the face of the flowers. Like you notice they have faces and stuff. And then he mentions that in here too.
I wanted to write a poem about this other yellow flower. It's the same kind of flower. I don't know what they're called. And I was walking in the woods, and it's fairly thick pine forest. And in the distance, I could see this yellow thing, and it just stood out because everything was just forest, right?
Yeah.
And there were no flowers in the forest. Is usually pretty. This pine needles. Pine is acidic, so a lot of things don't grow on the ground around pine trees. And anyway, and I saw this yellow thing in the distance. I'm like, what the heck is that? And it was up on a tree. Like it was like about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. And I was like, that's weird. Somebody must have tied a ribbon on there. So I went because we've got a lot of logging around here, and sometimes they traipse around and they tie these yellow ribbons on stuff, which I thought would be weird because it was in the middle of my property. But anyway, so I walked up there, and it was one of those yellow flowers, okay? And it was growing in this dark forest. And it had snaked its way around the trunk of the tree because it was so frail because it wasn't getting enough light, okay? So its stem, if it hadn't have hugged the tree, it would have been blown over by the wind, right? And it would have never achieved what it achieved, okay? So this is what it achieved. It wrapped itself, snaked itself around this tree, all about 4 or 5 feet off the ground, which is way too tall for these flowers. And when I saw it, the sun was shining on its little head. There was one little ray of sun coming through that forest, and it was on that yellow flower.
Wow.
And I stood there and I laughed out loud, and I said to it, "Look at you!
Yeah.
Oh my
Being
God,
all extra.
you're amazing! You are amazing. Like this flower was just defying all odds, okay? It was growing in acidic soil in a dark forest, and it nailed it. It nailed it. It had the only ray of sunshine in that whole forest.
Nice.
It was amazing.
I love that. I
It was
love
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
I wanted to write a poem about it, but I just and then I
This-
saw and then I was contending with these yellow flowers that the same ones that were like stretched across my path that I was having to go around, you know. They were kind of annoying me.
Yeah. Do you wonder if it annoyed the pine? The little flower climbing up him? I wonder if he
No,
had the
the
same feeling you did.
the pine at the time just looked
Get
like
off me.
he was totally stoic. He was like, I gotcha. I gotcha.
Oh,
Yeah.
I gotcha. You know?
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it was awesome. Well, I'm wondering, I'm going to have to go here soon. And I know for you guys, it's even later. So
Yeah, it is.
I'm
We
wondering
still
if,
got a ways to go, don't we?
well, we only have a
Oh,
few
man.
more pages, but I don't want to just whip through it. We like,
No.
honestly,
True.
we've got all the time in the world, right?
Yeah, we do.
We can take our time. It's worth it.
We can.
I think so too.
Yeah. There's just so much. Like, we're even missing,
I know we are.
missing a whole bunch already.
Yeah.
I love the way that she talks about the garden flowers and fairies and the woodland flowers and fairies, right? How the ones in the garden, because they're hybrids, right? So they're a wild rose and a hybrid rose. Those are two different animals, right? All together.
Mhm. Oh yeah.
And so how does she say it? She says that they're more educated. Where is that?
Yeah, they're
let's
more
see.
staid
Stayed and educated.
than those of the fields and the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's
They're
like
orderly. They're
is that like a
what?
diss too though?
Yeah, maybe. A
I
little.
don't know. I don't
maybe
know if that's a compliment or it doesn't have to be one or the other
I
either.
think it's just a what is. It's one of George's what is. He's talking
Yeah.
about what is, you know.
Yeah, because they look
Oh.
nicer. You know, you plant fairies in the garden. They're like in a nice order. They're arranged. They're like more orderly. There's a whole different feel to them, and so
Yeah,
they're
academic.
more. Yeah, you could almost they kind of they have something to boast about, I guess, to the ones in the wild. You know, I don't know, in a way, or they could feel that way.
Yeah, of course they have near relations amongst the wildflowers, but they patronize them and treat them as country cousins who know nothing of life and very little of manners.
Country.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I would see those wildflowers as just more sophisticated and maybe even integrous, but I know he's just saying what it
Well,
is.
they have a saying here in the ranching country of the Chilcotin is we're just getting her done. Right? Let's get her done. And that's kind of what the wildflowers do, right? They're like, let's just get her done,
Yeah. But they don't
Yeah.
need like the perfect soil conditions, like a lot of times a lot of the wildflowers, I'm shocked to find out that I don't need they need like some of the, like, give me the worst soil and I will make it happen. Or give me the least amount of light and it's like get her done, exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, they just get her done, but I was thinking about you a lot, Luke, when I was reading through this, because your wife grows a ton of flowers, right?
Yeah, we've got a ton of them.
I think you're gonna be seeing your flower gardens quite differently from now on.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Oh yeah. I thought about that while reading through all of this, and especially
when he describes the faces, when he gets down to the baby face of the daisy.
Oh, I know.
All
Yeah.
that stuff is so good.
Yes. Yeah. With the country bumpkin, I think is what he calls the daisy at one point. I think it's towards the end of the chapter. Country bumpkin.
I'm really excited.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. What did you say, Luke? Go ahead.
Oh no, we're not even to the point. But they were talking about primroses.
Yep.
And I planted so many of them last year, and they only put out, they're a perennial, so they only put out this basil floret. So this year will be like the first year where all the primroses will come out. But I didn't know anything about them, so now I got to spend a ton of time researching them because I was like,
Yeah.
where are these things? I thought I was going to get them, but I needed to go through the process of learning about them before I was ever going to enjoy them.
Right.
Yeah.
We
I have a
had
question.
primrose and snowdrops. A lot of these flowers that he talks about, they grew in Switzerland wild everywhere. And
That's
so
cool.
I'm familiar with them. And like the
Yeah.
snowdrop, it actually blooms out of the, if it happens to snow, but really early spring, right? So, and in Europe, it's moderate. It's a moderate wet climate, so you'll get snow, but it's not like below freezing.
Mm.
And oftentimes the snowdrops will be blooming through the snow. And that comes out in his description of snowdrop, right? Because she comes first. Anyway, we won't spoil it, but
We'll get
Yeah.
and I'll have some things to say about primrose and snowdrop and those.
That's so cool. You have all that like personal connection with them. You've actually seen them, the flowers, because they're all kind of unfamiliar to me. Is this
Yeah, they're
snowdrop kind of?
European flowers. Yeah, for sure.
Is it like Edelweiss? Is that kind of like
Snowdrop?
the snowdrop? No.
It's a bulb. It's a bulb.
Oh,
So it would be I think it's a bulb, yeah. And it's very fine. It has like sword-like leaves that come out first like a lily, and then it just has a stem, and then it has a little white bell type flower.
oh,
And
that's
you can
cool.
probably Google it and see pictures of snowdrop flowers.
Yeah,
They have
I
a little
don't
bit
know
of
that many
green. They have a little
flowers.
bit of green on them,
That's
like
cool.
and
I'm gonna
it's
do it.
the head hangs, right? So that's why it's like a drop, because
Yeah.
it's a hanging head. And yeah.
So I got a question for you both. I'm looking at it right now. Oh, that is really pretty. What's your favorite flower? Do you have one?
Do I have one?
I do.
What is yours? I have to think. I don't think I have one.
I like
What's yours?
yarrow. I love like any of them that have those. Is it an umbel? I don't know
Yeah.
what it is, but like
Yarrow.
Queen Anne's lace, yarrow. That when they have like hundreds and hundreds of little flowers that make up the big flower.
Mm-hmm. Those are
Oh,
amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
wow. That's cool.
And you can make like flour and pancakes out of Queen Anne's lace. I did that once.
Elderberry is like that too. Elderberry trees. So in Switzerland they grow, and they have huge flat flowers like that, made up of millions. And you can make cordial out of that, eh? Elderberry flower cordial, where you just soak the flowers. And I actually recently watched a podcast. If you guys haven't seen it, it's a listening one only. He didn't do Michael Martin and Mike Sauter on. They talked to a lady named Mary Walter, I believe, and she's a healer, and she makes botanical essences, so flower essences.
Oh,
And she
wow.
talks a lot about the whole, like how she chooses the flowers, and how the flowers speak to her, and
it's all intuition, like,
and how flowers have bloomed out of season, and
Oh my gosh.
yeah, just it's an incredible podcast. I can thoroughly
I'll have
recommend
to
it.
listen to it.
So good.
Luke, you said all intuition. I was like, man, I would die so fast. I'd be like, oh, I feel like this could be good for me. My intuition would be terrible if I was in the woods. I'd be studying it. Like, let me give it a week. I'll just see what this flower is saying to me. All right, I'll eat it. I'd die. Sure. I need people like that.
Yeah, so we'll get more acquainted with the flowers and the fairies.
Yep. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine talking to two guys about fairies and flowers. And
there's no place I'd rather
like my dream come true. I'm glad you guys love Phantastes. It's so nice to have someone to enjoy Phantastes with as much as you guys love it.
Yeah. This
It's
book
so-
is a lifesaver. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, I found it, I think, when I was kind of in a glum place, I guess you'd say. And I actually referred to George MacDonald. It was a friend of mine was going through a tough time, and they're like, you should tell her about George MacDonald. And so then I don't think she ever even read him, actually, but I found Phantastes at the used bookstore, and they had like 2 copies of it. And I was like, well, I'll pick up the other one for myself. And then like it said on there, a fairy romance or something, I think in one of somewhere.
Yeah,
Fairy romance. So I was
Fairy
like, shit, I'm
romance.
not gonna read this. This is for girls. And then I ended up like I read the first chapter and I was like hooked. I was like, man, I cry when I read this book. This is like I do carry it like a Bible for me, basically. But
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
got to share more and more of your thoughts with us, Jason. Don't be shy, okay?
Yeah, please
okay.
do.
I know you've got lots of stuff highlighted in there, and
Yeah.
love to hear it. Love to hear about it.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to sign off here. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Don't jump out yet. But
Okay.
good night, everybody. Thanks for watching with us. Hope we didn't bore you.